Okay, this is my 3 countries comparison project by Ryan D'Angelo. So here's a table of contents. Got an introduction, forms of government, political culture and interest groups, ideology and policymaking, brief conclusion, and then my APA references list. So brief introduction, we have Iran, Norway, and the United States, which are the 3 countries that will be discussed in this presentation. And there was a lot of interesting comparisons between these 3 countries that'll be taken note of throughout the entirety of it. But overall, these 3 are a very interesting group to look at when it comes to their government system and how they're run. So forms of government is the first topic. So looking at their government structures. With Iran, their government is considered to be a theocracy. They have a system of government where a religious figure is the ruler of the country. So Iran is also considered to be the Islamic Republic of Iran, which promotes that theocratic nature where they are saying that they follow the Islam religion. So an Islamic leader is the leader of the state. The government is also mixed, as it is written in the Constitution from 1979, which means that the executive, judiciary, and parliament of their government are looked over by members of clergy. So again, very much emphasizing that religious nature that they cling closely to. There is a president of the country, so there's a parliamentary system and there's a president, but that doesn't make them necessarily democratic, so that's just important to remember. The president has to be a native of Iran and needs to be part of a certain sect of the Islam religion, which is also important to know that they must be part of that religion, so it's promoting that theocratic nature again. So they also have varying political parties and political actions of the citizens that they try to take part in, but a lot of the engagement has been disbanded or not allowed, and that'll be discussed more in the democratic aspects in the next slide. So then moving on to Norway, they're considered to be a constitutional hereditary monarchy. This government includes a prime minister and the statsråd, or the council of state. These 2 are chosen by the monarch and the country's legislator, which is called the Storting. Norway's government, but specifically the Storting itself, has operated as bicameral, but in 2009 they switched to unicameral. However, when it came to the bicameral nature of the government, they only divided into 2 houses when it came to voting on laws. And Norway's constitution was framed after the United States and includes amendments, so that's something to look at when it comes to democracy, which I'll mention in the next slide. And the political process for the country is that there's an election every 4 years, and there are 169 members of the Storting, so people, just like in the United States, if you're 18 and older, you're allowed to go vote in those elections, and similarly with Iran. So they basically, depending on where you live, that's how you'll vote for a candidate. It's not, so you don't get to vote for any of the 169 members, it just depends on where you're living. Then we move on to the United States. They're considered to be a democracy. So there's a national government, and some powers are also delegated to the states. So the national government has a separation of powers, which includes the executive, judiciary, and legislative branches. The legislative branch consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they have been given certain powers under the Constitution. Both members of the House and the Senate are voted for in each state, so depending on where you live again, you'll vote for certain people. The House is voted for depending on the district they represent in which one lives. The judicial branch of government in the United States includes the Supreme Court, which consists of 9 justices, and those justices are typically appointed by the president, and they're also meant to serve life if they're appointed. The executive branch is led by the president, and the president's qualifications are that they are United States born and are at least 35 years of age and a resident of the country for 14 plus years. In the United States, people elect the president every 4 years through the Electoral College. This all shows that the United States is a democracy, and then I will go on to discuss more about that on the next slide. So, are they democratic? Iran is considered not to be democratic. As I was mentioning before, there are actions and political parties that got disbanded. So the Islamic Republic Party and Muslim People's Republic Party were disbanded by Ayatollah Khomeini, who was Iran's leader up until 1989. So he didn't agree with their parties and political views. So a lot of times, parties will get disbanded or people will get in trouble if they aren't agreeing with the government. In Norway, people do participate in elections, so they're considered to be democratic in that regard. But it's hard to say how democratic they really are. They do have a lot of civic engagement, so they do get considered to be a democracy. And then I'll be talking about more in the civic culture section. The United States is definitely very highly democratic based on popular consent and human rights. So as I mentioned before, like, people are always having a voice of who they want to be elected in different offices. So they focus a lot on that. Now, in terms of the Constitution, Iran's Constitution, it's that they have a national religion, the Islamic religion, and most of their principles and laws follow the Islam religion. So they're very focused on the religion itself. Then that's different from the United States because there is no national religion in the United States. And specifically in Article 2 of in Iran's Constitution, it talks about the beliefs of the Islamic Republic, and they basically are completely related to the Islam religion. In Norway, the Constitution mentions Christianity, so they do follow Christian values, and they also have a national church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church. And the United States is different from these two because they do not have a proper, like, formal religion, national religion or national church. They actually, even in their constitution, it says that they can't favor one religion or no religion. They just allow practice of religion, of any religion, no matter what it is. So overall comparison, the countries definitely differ in a lot of regards, as I mentioned here. And Iran and Norway definitely seem to be more similar in terms of their governments because they both have a prime minister. They're both parliamentary. But they also have religion as an aspect of their everyday life. And each of the countries does hold elections, so that's a similarity between all three of them. But I definitely think that Iran and Norway compared a little more here. So now we have political culture and interest groups. So for political culture, in terms of Iran, Iranian citizens are allowed to participate in their government by voting for who becomes the president. But the supreme leader, who is that religious figure, religious figure, they are not voted for. So they only get to vote for president. And then there's also assembly of experts, who are the people that are elected. They're elected for 8-year terms. So they get to vote for people once every 8 years for them and then once every 4 years for the president. And the assembly of experts keeps track of the supreme leader and keeps them in check for a lot of things. They make sure they're fit for their job, so they're actually pretty important to vote for. So it sounds like that's a good thing for the people to have a say in. Then if we move on to Norway, they also take part in voting. So they vote for their president as well, or I shouldn't say their president. They vote for their parliamentary system as well. They have that 169 Storting system, so they take part in that every 4 years, just like a general election would. And different sections of the state can actually vote anywhere between 4 and 20 members because, again, it's broken up depending on where you live. So you might be able to vote for 4 members, you might be able to vote for up to 20 members. So it really just depends on where you live. And then in the United States, you get to vote for president, Congress, and then there's so many other people that you can vote for on a ballot. So just more importantly, though, the president and Congress are people that you want to make sure you're looking into when you go to vote for them. But that's how the political culture happens for each of these 3 countries. Civic culture, in Iran, they're considered to be very charitable, and this is also because they are highly religious. So a lot of times they place a large focus on charity, and there are about 14,000 to 26,000 charities, as well as NGOs. or the non-governmental organizations. And there's also community funds that exist within the country. So a lot of these charities are religious based, so that they really do focus their religion into all of the charities that they are supporting. But again, because they are religious, that comes like stated in their own religion. They feel the need to take part in charity. So that's pretty important for them. Then Norway. Norway is part of the Scandinavian countries, and they're all said to have a lot of involvement in terms of civic culture. But Norway in particular has the highest levels of civic engagement. Norwegians refer to civic engagement as dugnad, and that can include like getting together with people to help move somebody to a new house. They clean the streets. They organize local community events, so they really do participate a lot in making sure they stay close together with their peers. And then the United States, most of their engagement really relates to elections or campaigning. There isn't a lot in terms of what was mentioned with the other two countries. So yeah, their biggest focus is on such as signing petitions, contacting a local representative, that kind of thing, voting in the big elections. That's their big civic culture. Then we have social movements. When we look at Iran, their big one is woman, life, freedom. And this is really important because women do lack a lot of freedom. Unfortunately, they still do. They have for a long time. So in 2022, protests began in Iran after a death of a specific person occurred, and then the government began placing even stricter laws on women regarding their hijabs. And this basically led to a lot of businesses not being able to serve women anymore, and they had to close down. Because at the time, women, if they were businesses that would allow women to not wear the hijab, these stricter laws made it so now that wasn't really possible. So these people could not go in and eat a nice dinner without their hijab. So this movement, again, is called Women, Life, Freedom, and it is the most active one that's going on at this current time in Iran. And essentially, they're just fighting to get freedom back for women because, again, they don't really have much of a say in what they do and what they wear. And this also is related to the religious ideals of the government. Norway has a few movements that aren't, I would say, the best at all because of the way that they react to things. So they have Nordic Resistance Movement and People's Movement Against Immigration. So the Nordic Resistance Movement is a white nationalist organization, and although it's across Scandinavian countries, it's still very popular in Norway specifically. And this group is very violent, and they're very outwardly racist and discriminatory against LGBTQ and even other minority groups, and very much do not support immigration. And this group has been part of a lot of violent attacks against political figures or anyone that does not agree with what they have to say. Then the People's Movement Against Immigration is a group that commonly consists of older people now than it used to consist of a lot more youth, but now it's mostly just older people. And the group is outwardly against immigration and is discriminatory. So they're very similar to the Nordic Resistance Movement because they agree on discriminating against immigrants. Then in the United States, we have a few movements. We have the Black Lives Matter movement, and that has been a movement that's been around for a while, but after 2020, it really started increasing in terms of people protesting or donating money. Just supporting BLM became more of a thing. Racism has been a thing in the United States for a very long time. So this movement is to try to include Black Lives Matter, essentially. Then we have the Me Too movement, which that deals with awareness for those who have experienced sexual harassment or assault, which unfortunately is a very bad problem that's in the United States. Then there's also pro-choice or pro-life movements that are basically protesting about abortion rights. as abortion has been a topic that's been going back and forth, especially in more recent years. But for a long time, abortion has been quite the topic in the United States. So all these movements are essentially about human rights and protecting people. So the overall comparison is that there are a lot of issues in each of these countries that has been mentioned, but that's why the social movements are really important. Getting engaged in those movements can really make a difference. This also starts with the amount of political and civic engagement there is in general, though, because if there's not a lot of political and civic engagement, when you do have the opportunity to go out and vote for somebody that might make your life different, that definitely you want to participate civically and politically. All the countries do have their citizens participate in elections, but the rest of the engagement is really up to the people. So however much you want to participate, that is really up to you and your country. Now we have ideology and policy making. So starting with Iran and their political ideology. So in the 1900s, which was called the Constitutional Revolution for them, nationalism was really booming for them, like rapidly. So they were really gaining nationalism in their country. But then the theocracy came about, and that was more of the focus rather than the nationalism. So the Islamic ideology took over, and everything came down to the religion itself and what the beliefs and values are, and that's what kind of shaped the political ideology. There were different leaders that had different opinions that were leaders of the country, and there were leaders of other countries that were kind of opposing the Islamic Revolution, or the Islamic Republic Revolution. So that was definitely something that they took a hit on. So that was a struggle for them. But essentially, they gained a lot of their political ideology just from establishing the Islamic Republic. Then Norway, they believe a lot in civil liberties and human rights. So that's really important for them. As I mentioned before, their constitution is pretty similar to the United States, and they have amendments, and they really focus a lot on the people and protection of them. They have a national church, but they do, and that definitely aids in the ideologies that are in their country. But they really care about the humans and the people and giving them freedom in their country. But they also do not tolerate religious discrimination, even though they do have a national church. So that is also important to keep in mind. They also, their political culture is based on core values such as egalitarianism and corporatism. So, and they're characterized by incremental measures. So, egalitarianism is equality between people. So that's really important. And corporatism means that large interest groups are how an organization will govern the state. So that's also important because these interest groups are obviously getting acknowledged in terms of how things will be governed. The United States has a political spectrum that ranges from conservative to liberal, so that's definitely important to keep an eye on because there are vastly different ideologies on both sides. So there's a lot of fragmentation, which is something that's been discussed in this class. The fragmentation anywhere between the spectrum of conservative and liberal will make a difference in the ideologies, essentially. Because conservatives they tend to believe the government should be smaller and it operates at the state or local level. And when you look at liberalism has changed a lot from time to time, but today they believe that the government should intervene in the economy and should have a broad range of social services. So essentially focusing more on the people, so being able to help them, again, interfering in the economy, because conservatives are said to not, things should be left to a state or local level. So it's a little different, but that is how the political ideology is for the United States. Then for political groups, Iran has 12 political groups that are active, but a lot of them get banned, as I mentioned earlier. A lot are disbanded because if they don't agree with what the current government is saying, then they will not be allowed to speak their minds. So there are a lot of political parties. They have the Association of the Devotees of the Islamic Revolution, Assembly of Militant Cleric, then Assembly of Researchers and Lecturers of Qom Seminary, the Association of the Women of the Islamic Republic, Executives of the Construction Party, the Freedom Movement of Iran, Islamic Coalition Party, Islamic Iran Participation Front, National Trust, the Office for Strengthening Unity, Organization of the Mojahedin of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, the Society of the Militant Clergy of Tehran, and then again, the rest of them are just disbanded and are not allowed. So then for Norway, they have about 9, but they only have 5 that regularly run. So the main parties are Labour Party, Conservative Party, Centre Party, Progress Party, and Socialist Left Party. The Labour Party is one of their main groups, as I mentioned in those 5, but it's actually a top group for them. Then the United States has 55 political parties technically, but a lot of those come down to a state level. Like, there are some that are specific to certain states. The main ones for the state, the country itself, are Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, and Constitution Party. But like I said, there are some for, like, specific states. Like, there could be one for California that's a Constitution Party, but maybe not for, like, New Jersey. So it just differs depending on the states of the country. So policymaking. Iran has said to have not been effective with their policymaking. They have had things that they focus on in terms of that. So they had promises of fulfilling, basically creating social justice, democracy, and independence. So again, this is showing that they obviously did not fulfill being democratic, as I mentioned earlier, that they are not democratic. So they haven't been able to fulfill this, and that I think a lot comes down to not really letting in other perspectives of things. They just restrict so much in their country that the policy making is really difficult for everybody to, especially for being a democracy. It's not ever going to get to independence and democracy. Norway, their Labour Party has said to have been working really hard at achieving human rights and freedom. So that's why I say the Labour Party is a big one, because they really do care about the people and all aspects of the government. They basically make everything a priority in the country. They don't focus on one thing or another. They focus on, like, everything, such as, like, care for the elderly, care for everybody. They focus on young people and their education. So they focus a lot on everything, which is different from Iran, because they focused on those certain things, but they couldn't even live up to them. So I think that Norway focusing on everything has been good, getting the job done. The United States, they have some effectiveness, such as the Depression that happened. Franklin D. Roosevelt created tons of new jobs and was fixing the economy and social welfare after the Depression. So he was able to work on that, and he did it effectively, and he had specific goals, like I mentioned, social welfare. But, for example, with that was a Democratic president. This Richard Nixon is a Republican president, and he had the Southern strategy, but that led to racial discrimination, and it just bad views on immigration. So that didn't really become effective because people were not in agreement with him, and that kind of hindered human rights in the country. Overall comparison. This seems to be an area where the 3 countries compare more than they contrast. There are a lot of ways that the civic culture in these 3 countries relate to one another, so they definitely compare a lot in terms of political and civic culture. The only area I say they differ a lot is really the effectiveness of their countries, because they have political parties in all their countries, but the fact that Iran's political parties are more focused on religion, and Norway and the United States focus a lot on other aspects and focusing really on the democracy and human rights of the people. That shows the difference between these 3 countries. Now I have a conclusion, just that the 3 countries that I mentioned today, Iran, Norway, and the United States, they have their own unique governments, and they are run vastly differently. as definitely has been mentioned, there are some similarities, of course, in the governmental functions and their ideologies, but there are a lot of differences that were taken note of this whole time. I think it's just really important to understand the difference between all of these countries because not every country is the same, and it's interesting to know that one is run differently than another and why they might be run that way. Like, we know that Iran is super religious. Norway is also religious, but they still focus a lot on democracy. And the United States, there's tons of religions, and their main focus is on the people. So I think it's really interesting being able to see all of that. Now, I have a bunch of references, so there's a few slides of that. All right, that's it.